Okay, so here we are at the Royal Ballet Pilates and Gyrotonic Studio. We're lucky that we have this lovely facility here to make use of Pilates as part of our rehab. Certainly in a ballet context, Pilates has a long association. So you may or may not have the reformers and things in your clinic, but just because this is a bone stress injury and dance, I'm sure there will be a reformer hanging around. And this is where a great area where you can do basically a reintroduction into jumps. So for us, when our dancers are learning to do their first steps or first jumps back after their strength block, they move from the strength phase to the jump phase. They'll start their first jumps here in the Pilates studio and using the reformer. So the reason why we use the reformer is because it's estimated that the reformer can take something like 20 to 30% off ground reaction forces. So obviously from an intensity of bone loading, we take some of that intensity of bone loading off so we can get more volume of jumps in. So this in a way is a form of deloaded jumping. The reformer really helps us to also do things like work on ballet technique. So we can look at things like foot position while they're landing because it's a bit more controlled. We can talk about things like motor control. We can really get into the minutiae of how the body lands and the foot and ankle absorbs force when it's really slowed down. And we've got time to focus here in the reformer and the Pilates studio on those sorts of key jump and landing elements within ballet. So to demonstrate our jumps here today, we have Shani doing some return to jumping, starting her first jumps in reformer. Hey Shani, how are you? Good, good. If you want to just lie on your back, then please do. I probably won't go through the exact details of how to set up the reformer. Hopefully you guys know how to set up the reformer safely in terms of the position, getting on and off, and also what spring setup you need. We're starting on sort of a lightish spring setup because it's return to jumps. This is the first time that Shani may have jumped in 2 or 3 months. So when someone's been off for maybe a couple of months before, again, starting at a lowish level with the reformer is the place to go. So when we start with reformer, like I said, maybe they've already been in Pilates for a couple of weeks, and we use the reformer to work on things like foot and ankle motor control and look at the landing and how the foot and ankle absorbs force. Now in ballet, it's important to get these sorts of positions first. So Shani, if she's coming into the Pilates studio, she might have been here for a few weeks already before we start jumping. And we'll work on these sorts of things now. So the sort of things we want to work on first. Shani, if you can get in second position for me, which you have. And if you notice with ballet feet, they're in a turned out position, and we're in a second position where the feet are sort of slightly wide or about hip width apart. In here, we can work on things like demi points. So Shani, do you want to go up and down on demi point with me? Which is another word for calf raises, basically. But demi point being ballet specific, and then it's in again a turn out position. And for a ballet dancer, pretty much maximal plantar flexion being achieved there. Also on the reformer, before we prepare for jumps, we can do something like working on point. You can do it bare feet, but you can also get point shoes on. So I think Johnny's going to talk about that next in the ballet studio, about how we do return to jumps in point and why that's important in ballet. But if we can just maybe show a point position on the reformer, just so people can get a sense of what's possible on the reformer, maybe go up and down into point a couple of times. And then we can work on things like how controlled we're going down into plantar-grade, controlling that descent, controlling that landing, talking about absorbing forces. This is one way to do it. Now, before we take off, we want to get a little bit more plyometric, and we want to get plyometric without leaving the board. So we'll do something like basically pulses or bounces. They might have been known like in terms of a running drill. So we're just going to do sort of basically some dynamic push off, Shani, where you push off the board, but your toe doesn't leave the board. So we're just basically pulsing against the board. Maybe let's do something like 5 to 10 pulses for me, just so we can see what that looks like before we actually take off and do a jump. Off we go. Okay, fantastic. So we're starting to get the foot and ankle and the body generally to be prepared about applying force in a short space of time, absorbing force quickly, these sorts of things, preparing the body to jump. Also, just to say that alignment's important in ballet. So we are looking at things like the alignment of the hips, the feet underneath the knees and the hips, And also, Shani should be engaging her core while doing this. This is not just a passive exercise for the rest of the body. There should be sort of some stiffness or tension through the system to enable the foot and ankles to work more effectively as well. But now we've checked all of that, we know Shani's done the prep work for landing and jumping well for the past few weeks. We are ready to finally jump on the reformer. So for reformer jumps, we'll just start with, again, in second position, and we're going to start with 2 feet. So we'll call it 2 to 2, jumping off 2 feet, landing on 2 feet. So Shani, can you give us 5 jumps, 2 to 2? Okay, great. So this replicates a ballet jumping position. A sauté is one of the most basic ballet jumps, and this is where basically a double leg counter movement jump. We're not too fussed what's going with the hands while they're on the reformer, but certainly again with the reformer they can just focus what's happening in the legs or from the foot and ankles at the moment. So this is a double leg or a sauté jump, replicating what she might be doing in the ballet studios next. So then once we've done 2 to 2, so jumping off 2, landing on 2, we might go to 2 to 1. So where we jump off 2 legs and land off 1 leg. Jump off 2 legs, land on 1 leg. Do you want to show people how to do that for us, please, Shani? That's it. Jump off 2, land on 1. Fantastic. Great. Now, this one gets slightly trickier, but we'll go from now jumping off 1 and landing on 2. These are all things that ballet dancers are going to have to do. They're things that athletes are going to have to do in terms of jumping, or depending on their sport, the whole thing of maybe taking off of 1 foot, landing on 2. It's very much applicable to sport as well, but in ballet they certainly do a lot of this. So need to be able to be able to take off on 2 legs and land on 1. So let's see what that looks like. Take off on 2, land on 1, take off on 2, take off on 1, land on 2, there we go. Land on, that was it. I think we got there. I think we got a couple in there where we took off on 1 and landed on 2. Good exercise for coordination as well. And then finally, of course, 1 to 1. So we could do jumping on 1 leg, just repeatedly on maybe your left side. And then we might finish with jumping 1 leg to the other leg. So let's just try left-sided single leg jumps on the reformer. Lovely. Great. And then just to say, while we're doing this, again, we can be looking at all sorts of things like how Shani's making contact with the ground, how she's traveling through her foot, how she's absorbing that force. It is different in ballet. You don't land with a pointed toe when you run or when you jump in sport. But in ballet, again, it's important how she lands and contacts the floor to absorb those forces, and we can use the reformer to do that and really work on that here. Finally, we'll go 1 to 1, but jumping to opposite legs, okay? Brilliant. Okay, awesome. Do you want to sit up for me, Shani? Thank you very much. That was great. When implementing return to jumps on the reformer, you might want to only start with maybe 10 to 20 jumps on that very first session. And we may only do that every second day. But the most we'd probably want to do, this is very general, but we'd probably start with maybe maximum 20 jumps a day on the reformer, particularly if someone, a dancer's had like 2 or 3 months off, either through surgery or just through doing their strength block. By the time they come to doing jumps, it could be 2 or 3 months down the line. So in terms of bony loading, the bone's probably a bit load intolerant in that way. But equally, there's an optimal amount of bone loading where 20 jumps or 20 contacts is a nice amount to get some bone stimulus without heading into that sort of bony fatigue area, and particularly someone who's coming back from a stress fracture, not just from their bone tissue, but other tissue. You want to just make sure that that's a gradual and progressive increase into bony load. So yeah, starting about 20 reps per day and then progressing on from there, building up your volume sensibly. Now, again, if Shani's been off for maybe 2 or 3 months, we might hold her in the Pilates studio for at least 2 or 3 weeks before then moving on to gym-based jumps.